Hello everybody, I'm Ian Abernethy and this is a follow-on video from the video I put out last week called Traditional Things I No Longer Do and Why. There was quite a lot of conversation around that video, people asking about some of the traditional things that I do and why I do those. So in this video we're going to look at some of the misunderstandings that arose from the last video, but mainly we're going to talk about why I still wear a gi, why I still employ the grading system, and why I still use Japanese terminology. So the first thing I'd like to discuss is a few misunderstandings that arose on the last video. The vast majority of people got it. The vast majority of people understood what I was saying and why I was saying it. But some, again, you get this vocal minority, didn't fully understand it, right? And these were things that were addressed in the video. So I'm not saying you should do as we do. Right. In that video, obviously, I explained why we've got rid of sensei, kneeling bows, lined up by rank, and explained why that works for us. But I was also very clear that doesn't mean you should follow suit, because what doesn't work for me may well work for you. It may be something that you and your students want from training. It's always dependent upon what the individual group wants. So it's not right or wrong, it's suitable or not suitable, depending on the environment you and your students want. So again, if you watch the video, I was very clear. I'm not saying everyone should follow suit. I wasn't making an argument for everyone to drop these things. I was explaining why I have. The second misunderstanding, which again was addressed in the video, is there was a misunderstanding from people who misunderstood that what I was saying is that I should get rid of what these things represent. So people were saying, well, your students don't call you sensei, you should want your students to respect you. I think they do. I think they respect me and I respect them, but the sensei thing for us would be a bit of a barrier to that. It would get in the way of communication, so I don't want it there. There were some people who said, if you don't bow, it's terrible that you're so disrespectful. We still are respectful. We're respectful to each other. We're respectful to the art. We're respectable to the founders of the art. The respect is still there, but we just show that respect in ways that make more sense to us, that we find are more culturally appropriate. None of my students were born and raised in Japan. So a simple thing like tapping gloves before they spar or shaking hands, that makes more sense than kneeling down and speaking Japanese words that they don't fully get, right? So again, if you like doing those things and they do make sense to you, keep doing them. But we've just found for us, it's better if we don't do them. So they were two key misunderstandings. I was not saying everyone should follow suit, and those things that the etiquette represents, we certainly haven't got rid of those. Those are still present. We've just got a different way of expressing them. Right? Now, the main misunderstanding that I want to address in this video is this idea that those cultural things need to be approached on an all or nothing basis. So a very common bit of feedback, if you look through the comments on Facebook and YouTube and the other places where I shared this video, you can see it there, was people thinking, you're being inconsistent. On the one hand, you're saying we don't use the term sensei, but you do wear belts and gis, Yeah, we do, because I see value in those, So I put a little video out through Instagram and Facebook explaining that, but I thought it might worth expanding upon here. So what we do is we keep the bits that we feel are serving us, and then we remove or replace the bits that we feel aren't, right? So it's not an all or nothing approach. Now, one thing again, before we get into discussing those specifically, that should be clear is I love the traditional martial arts. They have a beautiful flavor. I love doing an art that has a history, that has deep roots, that has stories going back a long way. That I love feeling part of that chain. That's why the modern martial arts, as great as they are, don't really appeal to me. I am definitely a traditional martial artist. But part of that tradition is it's always changed. As Funakoshi said, the world changes, times change, and the martial arts must change too. So just as karate altered when it came from Okinawa to Japan, when it comes from Japan to Cumbria, where I live, there's going to be some little cultural shifts. So I hope that explains some of the misunderstandings. Most of you got it. If you didn't, I hope that kind of explains. But go back and watch the video. All of this is discussed in there. But in this one, I now want to talk about the main things that people said, well, do you do this as well? And these are traditional things we do. And I would like to explain why we do these things. So one of the questions that was asked is, do you use Japanese terminology? And I do. And the reason that I do is not simply because, well, that's the tradition. The reason I do it is because I believe it's useful. Now, again, I'm not saying what you should do, because it may be in your dojo, you've got a different set of considerations and your students have different likes and dislikes. But for us, we have kept it. We use the Japanese terminology because it's the universal language of karate. I find it useful, especially as someone who travels a lot. So I can go to places where English isn't the first language, but the common Japanese terminology is enough to get us by. I have taught people where they don't speak English and I don't speak their language, but through through miming the technique, showing the technique, and Japanese terminology, I'm able to communicate. I sat on a grading panel this week in an overseas country. They put the grading sheet in front of me. It's not written in English, but I know what they're going to do is, because all the techniques are listed in Japanese, I can read the Japanese, right? Not the kanji, it's, written using Western letters, but, I read mawashigeri and I know what that is. If they were to use their language words for roundhouse kick, I wouldn't understand it. Right? Now, even if you're someone who doesn't travel as well, in this internet age where we're all connected, it can be useful to know that common terminology. So we can converse more easily, right? So, but it's not vital. Again, I think it depends on the group and what they want. One of the things I don't do is I don't use the Japanese terms to explain complex ideas, because it makes things needlessly difficult. So, for example, I wouldn't talk about mushin in my dojo and the idea of having a flowing mind. I would talk about things like being in the moment, being in the zone, this kind of thing, phrases that would make more sense to the audience I'm looking at. It would make no sense to use a Japanese term, then spend 10 minutes explaining the Japanese term, when I can use an English turn of phrase and they immediately get it. So I don't want the Japanese language to be a barrier to communication. I want it to be something that facilitates it. So therefore, when it comes to the names of all the throws, the locks, the kicks, the punches, the chokes, everything, we use the Japanese terminology, because that's the universal language of karate. Again, I've got plenty of friends who don't do that anymore, who stick solely to the English word. Fine, it's great, whatever works for you. But people were asking, do you use the Japanese? Yes, I do. Not because it's traditional, or not just because it's traditional. I do it because it serves a purpose. So the other one that came up was the gi, the karate suit. And sometimes that was presented as an argument as well from quite a few people, at least a dozen times. You don't use the term sensei, but you do wear a gi. Well, those two aren't related. As explained in the previous video, I don't use the word sensei because I feel in this part of the world that would be a barrier to the kind of communication and relationships I want with my students. Obviously not in every part of the world, but where we are, so we don't use those terms. But the gi is something else entirely, right? Not related. The main reason we wear a gi when we're training and teaching is it's good analog for normal clothing. When you're fighting, people can grip the clothing. Now, some clothing, like this t-shirt, might rip, but other clothing, jackets, sweatshirts, are strong. They will withstand a grip. So we need to practice using the clothing against the enemy, and we need to practice dealing with grips to the clothing. The gi's good for that. It's strong enough to support it. It allows for pulling, and it's safe too. People sort of say, well, why not just wear a jacket? Well, I could wear a Western jacket, but it's got zips and pockets on it. People will be slicing their fingers open and getting fingers bent back. So for safety, I think a gi's a good analog for normal clothing. Now, I don't always wear a gi. In a lot of my own training, my partner training and group training, we often have a gi present so we can stick it on if we need it, but I tend to train in shorts and t-shirt, is a lot of it. In solo training, when I'm doing kata on my own, shorts and t-shirt, right? But sometimes a gi is entirely appropriate, so I wear it. Most classes, I tend to wear a gi, and I tend to teach in a gi. So that was one. Why do they wear a gi? It's not because it's traditional. It's simply because it's useful. It's a useful form of clothing. It permits free movement. It allows for pulling. And of course, there is a place from the self-defense side of things to think about training with shoes on and in clothing that restricts movement. Of course, you're going to do that too. That's part of it. But generally, for the wider martial arts skill set, not just the self-defense side of it, a gi is a really useful piece of clothing to wear. It's designed for that purpose. It works well. So yep, we wear gis, and the reason we do it again is not necessarily because it's traditional. It's because it has utility. So the final thing to discuss is the grading system. Now, you could argue that the grading system isn't traditional. The Kyu-Dan grade system had been around for a while, but the first person to apply it to martial arts is Kano, the founder of judo. And of course, obviously, the karate guys just ripped him off. Kano came up with this idea of applying it to martial arts, specifically judo. He came up with the idea of belts. The karate guys went, nice idea, and they brought it in. It was brought in for its utility, not because it was traditional. Right, because they hadn't done it prior to that. It was brought in, and then relatively recently too. So you could make a strong argument that the grading system is not traditional. Nevertheless, I understand that it is something strongly associated with the traditional martial art, and rightly or wrongly, it's something that most people would label as being traditional. Which is why that topic came up quite a bit in response to the previous video. Some people wanted to know why I employ the grading system, and some people made the argument that they felt I was being logically inconsistent. You don't bow and kneel down and bow at the start and end of every class, but you do use belts. Once again, it's because they're different things. We do the belt system, the Kyu-Dan grade system, we've kept that because we believe it to be very useful. And the reason we believe it to be useful is it includes the two key parts that any good education model in any field of study has. If you're a student watching this, you know this. If you've had any education ever, in any field ever, you've probably had these two things. You had modular learning. You learned something first before you went on to learn the second thing. And at the end of the learning of the first thing, there was a test to prove that you had acquired competence, to prove that you had those skills or acquired those knowledge. And when you pass that test, you can now move on. If you don't pass the test, you carry on learning this stuff until you've definitely got it. That's common. It's just common in education, in everything, everywhere. So the Kyu-Dan grade system gives us that within the martial arts. So we have a 10 Q grades. So each Q grade is a little module. And then what happens is when they've acquired all those skills, prove competence in it through gradings, they then move on to the next level. You can argue that you could still have that without having the belts associated with it. But the reason we have the belts associated with it is it makes life easy for the instructors. We can look at the class and we instantly know who's at what level and who's learning what. Right? So it helps ensure relevant training to all the students. Otherwise, it's like a memory thing. Does Bob know that guy? Yeah, has he learned that drill? Yeah. What about Sharon? Where's she at with it? There's that kind of thing. But if I look at the class, I can just go, yeah, yellow belt, I know where they are. Brown belt, I know where they are. You just know immediately from glance. So it's useful. Of course, as a side benefit, students like it. It's a nice little motivator. They've worked hard to acquire those skills, to get that knowledge. They worked hard to pass that test. It's nice to have the little trophy. It's nice to have that little kind of representation of the success that they've enjoyed through their hard work. So it motivates students. But that's not the main reason we do it. The main reason we do it is it just makes life easier for the instructors. And by making life easier for the instructors, it ensures the best quality of training for the students. I don't really think you have to be careful with belts. You don't want the belts to become the goal. You want acquiring martial skills to be the goal, and the belts are kind of something that we use along the way for the aforementioned reasons, right? So I wouldn't want the belt to be the main motivation, but there's nevertheless that is a side benefit of it. So that's why we do it. It's useful to us in ensuring modular training and ensuring these tests of competence. It's good because it's easy for the instructors to look and see where everyone's at, and as a byproduct, it's a nice little motivator for the students. So that's why we do that. Not because it's traditional, because it wasn't deemed traditional until relatively recently. Just as Funakoshi brought it into karate for its utility, we've kept it for its utility. Now, I think, if we're talking about the grading system, we have to quickly mention some of the potential negatives with it as well. So it's not that it's always universally good. It depends how it's applied. Now, there's definitely negative ways in which the grading system can be implemented. So it can be used as a money-making racket. No doubt. We don't charge for gradings in my club. But not that I have anything against that. I understand that, if the grading examiners are taking time off work or away from their family, it's right to get some kind of recompense. If you've got a room that's not free, it needs lighting and heat and that kind of stuff. So I don't see anything wrong necessarily with charging for gradings, but there's a line where you realize it's not legitimate reimbursement for costs inferred, it's now a money-making racket. When people have, oh yeah, we have 50 Q grades and they do a grading every month, and every time they learn a new hand formation, they go up a grade and it's $100 a grading, those kind of things, maybe not as extreme as that, but you know what I'm talking about. You say, okay, it's no longer about structuring training effectively, it's now a means to take money from students as rapidly as possible. It's unethical, right? So that's a problem. The other time that the grading system can be a big problem is when it's used as a means of political control. So it's no longer about skills, competencies, levels of knowledge. It becomes about maintaining a given hierarchy for political purposes. And you sometimes see that in the bigger groups, where people are promoted or not promoted, not based on skills or knowledges, but based on the hierarchy, the levels of political control that people wish to exert. So that can be problematic too. But that doesn't mean the grading system's wrong. It means those things are wrong. The grading system itself is neutral. It's how it's used. Now, the other thing with the grading system is that you cannot cross-compare grades. So, if someone's got a first dan from one group, they are not the equivalent of a first dan from another group. It's very important that we understand this, and it's very important we educate the wider public about this, that gradings are internal markers only. So typically in my dojo, it will take a student around about 7 or 8 years to reach first dan, right? I know of places where they'll be hitting first dan within about 18 months. So that first dan and my first dans are worlds apart, right? And I think that, to me, I think it's important that we acknowledge that difference, because the only way you could avoid that is if you had a universal standard. So somebody went, this is what every single karate club in the world is going to learn, and this is what they'll have to do to get this rank. That's too authoritarian for me. I don't like that idea. I think it would be a race to mediocrity. I think it's good that we do have different grading systems and we have different levels, but I think it's important that we don't cross-compare. So it's not really a negative, the fact that we can't cross-compare, but I think it needs to be acknowledged that's the case. Gradings are internal markers only. Sometimes people look and they want to enforce what they think a grading should be on the rest of the world, for better or for ill. And I think that's not really the best way to go about it. You worry about what you're doing, be a good example. Hopefully people will follow suit, and as the public gets more aware that, not all Dan grades are equal, hopefully they'll start to not care about that, and they'll start looking for good quality training rather than who can give them the black belt the fastest, right? So we definitely still have the grading system. We believe it to be very useful. We have it because it gives modular training. You have to have a test of competence anyway, and the belts make it very easy for the instructors to see what's going on. That doesn't mean the grading system is always good. It can definitely have negative things associated with it, but that's not the fault of the grading system. That's the fault of those who are applying that grading system towards negative ends. Well, I hope you enjoyed that. As I said in the previous video and in this one, the purpose of these couple of videos are not to tell you what to do, right? I'm not arguing that you should do as I do. I was very clear on that. What I'm saying is that we should all question what it is we do. Now, when it comes to these cultural things, we'll all have different preferences. It gets a little bit subjective. The environment that one person likes might not be the environment that another person likes. The environment that gets the most out of one person could be confusing and restrictive for another. It all depends on what's best for you and your group, and that's ultimately up to you to determine. The thing that I hope is, though, that the thinking that I've shown is useful, and I would encourage everyone to think about what it is that you do. Now, again, these are subjective things. You're almost certain to reach different conclusions to me, and you'll have different goals to me, and that's as it should be. But we should all think about what we do, and then ask the question, is what I'm doing optimal towards achieving the goals that I want, okay? And if the answer is yes, then because you've thought about it, you are now doing that thing with more legitimacy. You're not just doing it because you've always done it, you've questioned it, it's proven its utility, and therefore you're continuing to do it. If you question it and find that, this doesn't really work, then that's an opportunity to make things better, right? So no bad thing can come from questioning what we do. So that's what I would encourage you to do. Question everything, question the cultural things, and then you determine what's right for you, which is almost certainly going to be different from me and mine. I'm me, my lot and my lot. We live where we live. We like what we like. They've come to me because they wish to do martial arts in a certain way. You know, we've all got different objectives. We're all from different cultures. We've all got different likes and dislikes. You need to work out what it is for you. One thing I would like to just, make again abundantly clear though is, for me, I am very much a traditional martial artist. There may be some traditional things that I no longer do, but the reason that I've chosen the traditional martial arts, the reason that I've devoted my life to them, the reason why I haven't switched over to the modern ones is the traditional arts have a flavour. They have a depth that I don't think the other ones have. I mean, and again, this is a personal choice thing. I'm not saying the traditional arts are better, but I'm saying for me and what I want from a martial art, with some objective things in there and some subjective things in there, the traditional arts are the right one for me. I'm proud to be a traditional martial artist. I'm proud to be a karateka. I love the art of karate. It's beautiful, fascinating, and functional. I absolutely adore it. So by me saying that there's certain elements of it that have been bequeathed to me that I'm going to get rid of, that's in no way me slighting the art. That's me trying to make sure that the art grows and thrives, that I make it as relevant as I can to the community which I'm in. And again, I'll just conclude all this with a great quote from Funakoshi. So Funakoshi again really did make some strong cultural changes to karate. And as a result of that, that's why you and I know about karate. If Funakoshi and others hadn't made those changes, hadn't made those cultural adaptations, it would never have took hold in Japan. It would never have spread to the rest of the world. It was dying out. It was dying out. But by making it culturally appropriate, boom, it spread. And Funakoshi said, times change, the world changes, and the martial arts must change too. Anyone who knows the karate history will know that it's been continually growing. To me, the tradition are the roots. I want a traditional martial art with strong roots. But the purpose of the roots is to draw nutrients to encourage further growth, new branches. The only tree that never changes is one that's dead. The ones that are living, that have living roots, right, will continue to change and grow. Not just in terms of technique and training methods and all that kind of things, but culturally too, just as it did in the past. So yeah, thank you very much for watching this video. I hope you found it useful, and I'll be back with more soon. Okay, take care now. Bye-bye.